Start here tonight. The FairPlay Movement, a lobby group that seeks to level the playing field for consumers and the private sector, says it is concerned by the impact that the high cost of doing business for farmers is having on food prices. It is estimated that households in South Africa are now spending upwards of 30% of their income on food. The FairPlay Movement says load shedding is just one of the major issues facing businesses and households, but managing rising debt levels is also important to cool the rise in food prices as well. Francois Baird is the founder of the FairPlay Movement, and he joins us now. Francois, thank you very much for your time this evening. Let's start here. You held a round table today to discuss how farmers are buckling under the pressure of rising input costs. Tell us why it's so important for South Africa right now to manage such input costs.
Farmers and families are both struggling. Farmers because they find the input costs very high, and families because they can no longer afford meat. For instance, we heard from the Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice representative Mervyn Abrams that in fact the cost of a trolley of basic foodstuffs now exceeds the basic grant. When you're in that position, we also see that middle-class families are having to borrow and they're buying food on debt. This is not sustainable, and South Africa has a looming food security crisis. For that reason, we believe there are short-term things that must be done. For instance, the government should immediately zero-rate value-added tax on bone-in chicken pieces to allow people to have access to chicken. Efforts should be made to assist farmers with the electricity situation, for instance, by being much more careful about how to load shed our farming community, because they produce the food we eat. And then we have called, and other organizations are joining us in the call for a national food security emergency summit. We believe it's time to put politics aside and for everyone to get together and say, here are the things that must be done now, and here is a longer-term plan to ensure that South Africa does not become food insecure. Already, millions of people are struggling with food security.
Indeed, many people are struggling to put food on the table. Francois, the last time we spoke at length about your calls for South Africa to put in place those zero-rated foodstuffs and bone-in chicken in particular. But we also heard today that zero-rated food items have actually increased higher in prices at 13% in the past year than those that are not zero-rated. That does put a spanner in the works, and it also means that it will not necessarily mean that chicken would suddenly be cheaper and affordable as a source of protein for many households.
This is why we were very, very happy to hear from the SA Poultry Association undertaking to pass on value-added tax savings to food consumers. It's vital for South Africans to have zero-rated VAT for bone-in chicken. It's going to be easy to see whether those savings are being passed on, and therefore we are confident that it will in fact give consumers a break.
Francois, the discussion today was also focused on farmers, small-scale and industrial-sized farmers, including those who are in townships, who are run by families in terms of poultry, selling chicken. What is happening in the poultry sector in South Africa that is such a concern for you, since many households rely on that food source as a source of protein every day?
You may recall that in the same event, we also noted the call from small chicken farmers to say chicken feed must be zero-rated for them. Many of them are not registered for value-added tax, and therefore it costs them more to buy feed than it would for the large producers who are passing on the tax to the consumer. In addition to that, The electricity situation means that many small-scale farmers who do not have the means to buy generators and in other ways support the supply of electricity for raising chickens are no longer able to raise chickens. This is creating a lack of access to poultry meat, which, as we know, is vital for the health of the nation. Already, South Africa has 27% of children under 5 being stunted. If we continue to do that, and we do not make sure that poor people, middle-class people, all the people of South Africa have access to affordable meat, animal protein is vital for the health of the nation. This is creating a long-term problem for the country.
There is also increased use of diesel as an alternative energy source by all farmers who can afford to spend that much on diesel. That is due to load shedding. The government, on the one hand, says that the one important thing is that they are going to be supplying some support in terms of support financially for those who go green in terms of renewables and solar panels. But you're saying that that's not enough in terms of the times that Eskom or municipalities actually switch off the lights, particularly for farmers. And you're calling for farmers to be almost exempt from certain times when it comes to power cuts.
We are calling on Eskom and the government and the farming community to get together and create a schedule for load shedding specifically aimed at farming operations. Because a farmer cannot wait when load shedding is done for certain operations on the farm. They have to be able to water their crops, for instance. They have to be able to provide all kinds of heating, for instance, for chicken rearing purposes. That is something that must be addressed. And in a careful, sensible way. We understand that everyone in South Africa is subject to load shedding. This is unfortunate, but it's the reality. However, by working together, we can help farmers to help us being fed in future and in the short term. And so that is why we're calling for more cooperation, closer collaboration between electricity suppliers and farmers.
Francois, there are some people out there who will say that it's mere scaremongering, talking about a food crisis in South Africa at this stage. But we've seen a decline in basic infrastructure in terms of water and roads and many other sectors that are important in terms of municipalities and communities. You are saying that this food crisis and food shortage is a reality even when you look at the problems that we have when it comes to infrastructure.
The entire food security value chain is creaking at the seams. It's buckling. And anyone who regards that as mere scaremongering is not informed. If you're not worried, you're not informed. It's important for all of us in South Africa to figure out how to assist the farmers who feed us to ensure that people can be fed and that we have a healthy nation in the future. Many people are already going hungry. This is no longer something that could happen. It's happening. And it's not only happening for poor people, it's now happening in the middle class as well. And we know there's a link between stability and food security. So there's a very real concern about the security situation if food security is not taken care of.
You're concerned about political instability, malnutrition, and hunger is well noted, but also the impact of the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine on the affordability of maize, soy, and grain, and fertilizers needed for food production. What are your calls on that front when it comes to what South Africa can do right now?
All these problems you mentioned in terms of the input costs of farmers are problems that must be addressed as part of this emergency food security summit. We believe it is not possible to make simple plans in isolation. For instance, the Trade and Industry Minister, Minister Patel, decided not to levy anti-dumping duties that he was mandated to deliver because of dumping and because these countries were found guilty to dump in South Africa. And he said, well, that's going to help us with food inflation. It did not help with food inflation, but it certainly helped many small-scale farmers to go out of business because they can't compete on a fair and level playing field with dumped chicken. And this is an important aspect that all the different parts of government should work together and then execute on the plan, not only make the plan, but actually implement the plan. So the Food Security Emergency Summit is the start, we hope, of a process of getting people to become serious about averting a food crisis in South Africa.